Hello and welcome to session 2. So in this session, we'll look at an overview of the international, the national, as well as some local biosafety and biosecurity guidelines, as well as the manuals. So we'll look at under the international, we'll look at the laboratory biosafety manual. So we're going to look at it, we'll look at an overview of the laboratory biosafety manual. Then after that, we're going to look at the biosecurity guidance. And then under the national, we'll look at the Zambia National Biosafety and Biosecurity Manual, as well as the Zambia National Waste Management Guidelines. Then also under the Laboratory Biosafety Manual, we're going to look at some of the monographs that are associated with the Laboratory Biosafety Manual, specifically for the 4th edition that is most recent at the moment. So let's get into it. So let's start with the Laboratory Biosafety Manual, the 4th edition, and the associated monographs. So what is the Laboratory Biosafety Manual and the like? So the purpose is to provide an overview of the WHO Laboratory Biosafety Manual 4th edition and its supplementary monographs. So that's the whole essence that we're talking about this particular section. Then it's significance. So this particular manual serves as the global standard for laboratory biosafety practices. Then the targeted audience for this particular document is the laboratory personnel, the biosafety officers, the health policy makers, to mention but a few. So let's look at a brief history about this particular document. So the first publication of the Laboratory Biosafety Manual was in 1983. So that's when the first ever edition came out. So some of the other editions that have been out, so of course the first edition was in 1983. Then there was a second edition that was released in 1993. So it took about 10 years for the second edition to come out before or after the first edition. Then the third edition came out in 2004. So it took almost 11 years for this particular edition to be released. So after the third edition, we now have the 4th edition, which was released in 2020, specifically in December 2020. So what are the key updates that have been available, especially from the 3rd edition to the 4th edition, which is the 2020 edition? So there's been a shift from prescriptive guidelines to a risk and evidence-based approach. So the 2004, which is the 3rd edition, mostly was a prescriptive guidance type of document. So it just gave some good laboratory practices and other type of guidelines that are supposed to be followed for you to have a safer working environment as a laboratory. But then there was a shift in 2020 in the 4th edition, where the main approach was, or the main guideline was mostly based on risk. So whatever you do in the laboratory, you're supposed to look at the risks that are associated with whatever you're handling before you actually implement whatever you are implementing as a laboratory. So there was a shift from the prescriptive guidelines or from prescriptive guidelines to a risk and evidence-based approach. So there was that shift. So that's the main difference between the 3rd edition or the previous editions from the most recent edition, which is the 4th edition. So let's look at the core document overview. So like I've already mentioned, it emphasizes the risk-based approach. So whatever you do, you need to back up whatever implementation that you're doing with a risk assessment, because the risk assessment will tell you exactly where most of your problems are coming from, depending on the risks that are mostly high in certain areas of a laboratory, and therefore even your mitigations will be mostly targeted towards those risks that are mostly high or unacceptable, as compared to just randomly putting up mitigations like the way the previous guidelines were tailored. Then it also offers a flexible and sustainable approach to biosafety as compared to the other editions. Then, of course, we said there's a shift in focus from fixed containment levels to tailored practices. So there was fixed containment levels that were described or were guided in the other editions, where mostly the containment levels were basically placed into four biosecurity levels or containment levels, where there was biocontainment level 1, biosafety level 2, 3, and 4. But then now there's more of a tailored practice, and mostly the containment levels are mostly based on the risks that are calculated or are determined from the facility before you actually place that particular laboratory or organization into a specific biocontainment facility feature. So now there's a shift from the biosafety level 1, 2, 3, and 4 to the core requirements, heightened control measures, and maximum control measures. Then supports local solutions and continuous improvement of biosafety. So, of course, this is mostly a repetition from the previous. So there's been an evolution and rationale for risk-based biosafety in this particular document. Then risk assessment, identifying and evaluating laboratory risks. So this is like the structure that the document follows. Now there's an introduction where it introduces the evolution and how do you make sure that whatever you're doing is focused on the risks and not on the prescriptive guidelines that happened or were available in the other types of the other versions of this document. Then it also looks at risk assessment. So under risk assessment, this is where now you're identifying and evaluating your laboratory risks. Then after you do your risk assessment, there's risk control. So there are a lot of different types of risk control measures. So we have your engineering controls, you may have your administrative controls, got PPE as well as other types of control measures. Then it also looks at implementation, so integrating safety into daily operations, of course implementing depending on the risks that are determined for each particular laboratory. Then also it emphasizes the monitoring of the implementation of the control measures, because if you are monitoring, this will ensure that there's continuous evaluation and improvement of your overall management system. So basically that's that on the Laboratory Biosafety Manual. So of course it was created by WHO, but then in addition, WHO also released some monographs. So there are some sections in this Laboratory Biosafety Manual that have been explained in brief, but then some of them have been amplified using the associated monographs. So there are 7 detailed guides expanding on key topics from the core manual. So almost all of these monographs are topics in the Laboratory Biosafety Manual 4th edition. The only difference is that they have been explained a little bit more in detail in these parts or in these monographs as compared to the Laboratory Biosafety Manual itself. So one of the monographs is risk assessment. Then we have laboratory design and maintenance. We have biological safety cabinets and other primary containment devices. Then personnel protective equipment. We have decontamination and waste management, biosafety program management, and the 7th monograph is outbreak preparedness and resilience. So these are the 7 associated monographs to the 4th edition of the Laboratory Biosafety Manual. So let's look at each of these monographs just a bit in brief detail. So let's look at the risk assessment monograph. So in the risk assessment monograph, mostly this monograph gives a detailed guidance or a detailed guidance on how to conduct the laboratory risk assessment. But then the only gap that this particular monograph has is that it concentrates mostly on how to conduct a biosafety risk assessment. So if you need more information on how to conduct a biosecurity risk assessment, you need to look it up in the Laboratory Biosecurity Guidance. So we're going to look at this particular document after the monographs. So there are some tools that come with this monograph. So there are some templates, both long and short-term templates on how to do a risk assessment. So if you just need to do a quick risk assessment, you can use one of the short templates for the risk assessment. But then if you need to do a more comprehensive risk assessment, maybe you are coming from a facility that is maybe high level and has a lot of components, you may want to use a long form type of template. Then also it gives some real life scenarios on how some of the risks may be determined, or some of the risk assessments can be done. So it gives some case studies and some real life scenarios that you can actually use as examples in order for you to do a risk assessment. So one of the objectives for this particular monographs is that it enables laboratories to identify and mitigate specific biosafety risks. So emphasis on the biosafety risks. So mostly it will guide you on how to do a biosafety risk, and mostly at very lower detail on how to do a biosecurity risk assessment. So let's look at the second monograph, the laboratory design and maintenance. So what's the main focus for this particular monograph? So the main focus is, it looks at how laboratories are supposed to be designed. So it looks at the design considerations for the laboratories, and also it looks at this particular part in relation to different biosafety levels, or in different biocontainment levels or facility features. Then it covers about 6 phases on how to actually conduct your laboratory design considerations. For example, how do you plan for your laboratory design? How do you construct the laboratory? How do you conduct certain operations as you are planning and designing for this laboratory? How do you do maintenance of particular equipment in the laboratory? For example, how do you do maintenance for your biosafety cabinets or any other containment devices or equipment? And also, how do you decommission some of the equipments? So what is the emphasis of this particular monograph? So the emphasis is on the integration of risk assessment into the design processes. So even when you're designing the laboratory, or when you're planning on how you're going to design a laboratory, you should always do a risk assessment before you come up with the actual laboratory design. So what are the risks associated with actually putting up that structure where you're supposed to put it? So what are the implications on the people that will be working in that particular lab? And what are the implications on the environment around the laboratory, as well as the communities at large? So you look at the risks that are associated with all the aspects, or all the key players in either the people working, the environment, as well as the community. So let's look at the third monograph. So the third monograph we're going to look at is the biological safety cabinets and containment devices monograph. So mostly this one looks at your biological safety cabinets, as well as other containment devices that you may have or may be available in your laboratory. So it gives an overview of the types of biocontainment facilities or containment devices, or different containment levels. Then also it gives information on how do you select your biological safety cabinets, how do you select the different containment devices that you may need. Of course, you need to start with your risk assessment. Then after that, you can now do your selection of which cabinets or which devices may be appropriate to your laboratory. And also it gives information on the proper use of the primary containment devices. So one of the main devices which are primary containment is your biosafety cabinet. So it gives you detailed information on how to use a biosafety cabinet. So depending on the the class itself. So to give you how do you use your class 1, your class 2 until your class 3, and then the other subclasses that come with the class 2 and the like. Then also the best practices. So it gives you also the guidelines on the best practices when you are either operating your biosafety cabinet or any other containment devices. So how do you operate? What are the best practices when you're operating? What are the best practices when you're maintaining these devices? As well as how do you properly decontaminate your devices? So what is the proper best practice for that? So what's the main goal for this monograph? So it ensures that there's effective containment of biological agents. So that's the main goal. So let's look at the fourth monograph. So the fourth monograph is your PPE monograph for your personal protective equipment monograph. So what does it cover? So this particular monograph covers how do you select and how do you use your PPE. Of course, before you do any selection and use, you're supposed to look at the risks that are associated with whatever activity that you're using that PPE for. So there should always be a risk-based approach when you're selecting your PPE. Then it discusses some types of PPE a little bit more in detail. For example, it will discuss how do you use your gloves, how do you use your gowns, how do you use your respirators, how do you use your eye protection. So for example, how do you use your goggles, how do you use your face shields. Then under gloves, it will tell you how do you don on your gloves, how do you doff off your gloves, and the like. So it will give you a bit more details on how to use certain types of PPE, as some of the examples that have been given here. So guidance. So I've already mentioned proper doffing or donning of the different types of PPE, and then most importantly, how do you dispose of this PPE? So the different types of PPE, you may have different methods or procedures of by which you're supposed to dispose them of. So it also gives you that guidance on how to dispose your PPE in an appropriate as well as safe manner, both security and safety wise. So let's look at the fifth monograph. So the fifth monograph is the decontamination and waste management. So here mostly to give you a little bit more details on how you do your surface, how do you do your equipment, as well as other types of decontamination procedures. So how do you do your surface decontamination? How do you make sure that your equipments are properly decontaminated? Then it also give you how do you decontaminate on a routine basis, and then how do you decontaminate maybe after you decommission or after or before you dispose of an equipment. So to give you the proper decontamination procedures. Then also to give you information on the safe handling and disposal of lab waste. So how do you make sure that you have a proper waste management program? So it will give you a little bit more in details on how you safely handle and dispose of all your laboratory waste. The sixth monograph is the biosafety program management. So basically this one is mostly for those laboratories or organizations that want to set up a biosafety or biorisk management program, or biosafety management program to be specific. So how do you establish a comprehensive institutional biosafety program? So to give you that information. Then it will also cover how you may come up with your policies. How do you make sure that your policies are well tailored and aligned to your goals? Then how do you do your trainings, and how do you manage your incidents in your facility? So overall, how do you put up, or how do you make sure that there's a proper biosafety program management in your facility? Then the seventh one, which is the outbreak preparedness and resilience. So this one mostly gives you guidelines or information on how you properly plan for an effective outbreak response. So mostly this one came about because of the COVID pandemic, which proved that we need to have proper effective outbreak preparedness. So through that, we were able to learn on how to properly do or conduct certain procedures when there's an outbreak. So here it will give you that guidance. How do you adapt to an outbreak? How do you prepare? How do you plan? And how do you make sure that there's some form of training as well as continual improvement during an outbreak? So there's always there's that information that this particular monograph will give you a little bit more in detail as compared to the topic that is in the Laboratory Biosafety Manual 4th edition. Okay, so how do you implement this particular document as well as the monographs? So the first thing you need to do is you need to do an assessment. So how do you do the assessment? So you evaluate your current biosafety practices against the Laboratory Biosafety Manual guidelines. So you look at the guidelines that are in the Laboratory Biosafety Manual against what you're currently doing. So after that, you need to look at what are some of the gaps, what are some of the things that you may not be doing that the guidelines are telling you to do, and that is what you are going to implement and improve your overall biosafety implementation, either at facility level or any level that you're looking at. Then training, you need to obviously educate staff on risk-based approaches and new protocols. So you need to make sure people know if there's any changes on the risk-based approach that is now currently being used, especially from the WHO Laboratory Biosafety Manual, where whatever you do, you need to do a risk assessment. So you need to make sure people know and they're aware that of what they're supposed to do, and how do they make sure that everything they do, there is some risk assessment backing up whatever decision or implementation that is being done. Then customization, so you need to now adapt the guidelines to fit local contexts and resource availability. So there are certain maybe implementation or guidelines that may not meet what you have as at a local level. Maybe you may not have the resources to have what the guidelines are telling you. Therefore, you need to look at what best can work for you in accordance to the guidelines. So you look at how do you adapt these guidelines so that they fit into your local contexts, as well as what resources you have. So it's not everything that maybe you may conform or comply to that maybe the guidelines are telling you. So you need to look at all those things before you have that implementation strategy, or before you actually implement anything that the guidelines are telling you. Okay, so here, this is just where you may get further resources, or where you can get more information on the Laboratory Biosafety Manual as well as the associated monographs. So you can get the WHO publications, for example. You can access the Laboratory Biosafety Manual 4th edition and the monographs at the WHO's official website. So these are free documents. You don't need to actually buy them, or you don't need to buy them. They are free documents. So you can just go to their website. You can be able to download, and you can actually have these documents downloaded, and you can read them and try to understand what they actually talk about. Then if you need more additional support, maybe through the you don't get all you need from the downloads, you can always contact the WHO Biosafety and Biosecurity Health Security Protection Team for guidance. So you can visit either their website and click on help or support, and then you can ask them whatever it is that you may want to know that is not indicated clearly in the documents. So in conclusion, so the WHO Laboratory Biosafety Manual, 4th edition, provides a flexible, risk-based framework for laboratory biosafety. So emphasis, laboratory biosafety. So remember, this is a laboratory biosafety manual. It's not a laboratory biosafety and biosecurity manual. So the main emphasis or the main implementation that it will mostly look at is the biosafety implementation. Therefore, if you need to strengthen the implementation of the biosafety program, mostly you would want to get the guidelines or the guidance from this document. But of course, we can always go to action. So there's always an encouragement to adopt and adapt these guidelines to enhance global health security. So these are some guidelines that you may need to adopt or adapt so that you improve your overall biosafety implementation, either at facility level, national level, any level that you want to implement your biosafety measures.